Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see all of you here. Usually I have talks in much smaller rooms than this. I tend to talk about like really niche things. So this is a treat for me. So let's start at the beginning. So in 2017, I made a little bit of a fuss about election security. And this was actually the escalation of my fuss, and then it just got worse from here. The worst day, I was on live television twice and recorded television once in the same day. Okay, fine, I made a lot of fuss. Okay, and I didn't actually stop, because it sounds like when I say it in past tense, it sounds like I actually stopped making fuss, and I didn't. But things have happened since then. This year, for the first time, Norway has regulations in place that regulates the counting of ballots in Norway. So we've always been voting with paper ballots in Norway, but until this year, there was no audit of the vote, and a large portion of the votes in Norway were only counted by computers. This year, we have a regulation in place, finally, after a lot of writing on the internet, that at least one of the counts has to be manual. And it is specified also that manual actually means by people and not by machines. And on Monday, we will have our first election in Norway with this regulation in place. But another thing also happened. On January 1st, Norway's new National Security Act went into effect. And for the first time, the actual counting of ballots or voting systems in general are considered to be a concern for national security. And therefore, NSM, the Norwegian Security Agency, actually has purview to look at and study and audit election systems in Norway. So this will have profound effects on election security in Norway for the foreseeable future, unless somebody messes it up in the political process, which is always an option. But the thing is, the one thing that I want to talk about today is not any of those things. I want to talk about the fact that nothing happened. And this is true for the entire world. Nothing really happened in 2017 or 2016 that made elections less secure. And this is an important fact. Yes, things happened. I'm not saying things didn't happen, but nothing made it less secure in 2016 than it was in 2015 or 14 or 13. We just got scared. And fear has a great effect in IT security. Fear gets you money. Fear gets you meetings. Fear gets you the resources to do the things that you need to do. It just felt more likely all of a sudden that someone will meddle in our elections. Didn't feel like a conspiracy theory anymore. But let's have a game. So we're going to have an election. This is going to be for the president of Norway. We don't have one, so it's about time. And you can elect either the turtle or the hare. We will do it here by a show of hands. And so we will start the election. So, hands up, anyone who wants the turtle for president. Okay. And the hare? Okay. And I will give you the results. Are you ready? Of course, none of you actually believed that I just now scanned the audience and counted all of the hands. And actually having scanned the audience, the results are quite accurate, actually. But you wouldn't believe me, right, doing this. But let's say that I put up a bunch of cameras on stage, filming all of you. And then having like some kind of animation, so you would see the picture of the audience, and I would have some like image recognition. I would zoom in on the hands. I would maybe have some like really nice graphics that would go like very dynamically up and down as it was like counting, and then I would give you the results. Okay? Chances are a bunch of you would actually believe me. And that's not bad, because I could make that. I can build that. But you know what's really easy? Is to fake that. And that's the problem. Because who can you trust? Maybe I was the turtle. Maybe the turtle is my turtle. Who is feeding you the data? And what are their motivations? So the talk is called Trust and Critical Infrastructure, Elections. Elections are central to this talk, but I want to pull some lessons from elections. So I'm not going to talk so much about who I am, but you can Google me, I guess. So Matt Blaze, Professor Matt Blaze is one of the foremost experts of election security in the world. Has written lots of things on it, has also testified before Congress in the US. And this is one of many tweets in the same vein. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I've been working in security and large-scale systems for over 25 years. Civil voting is by far the hardest and most complex problem I've ever encountered. And this is what I struggle to explain to people, and so I will try to explain it today. Because complex. Like if you think about it, it doesn't sound so complex. Is the Norwegian election system so complex? Not really. So I'll read you a quote. This is from a master's thesis. And this is from the abstract of that master's thesis. It says, the testing is performed using a prototype implementation in Java. Though the implementation does not take into consideration security and anonymity concerns, it is a full implementation of the electoral system. And when we talk about an electoral system is actually a system of systems. It's a distributed system with many different types of systems communicating with each other. And that could be the system that is used to register the candidates that are going to go on the ballots, all the way to a system that is to display the results of the election. And there are a multitude of systems in between. This master's thesis was to evaluate the transport of data from different types of systems using an XML standard, which was called EML, Election Markup Language. And I was testing it for the Norwegian laws and regulations with regards to elections to see if it was possible to express it with EML. And I want to really put an emphasis on the sentence, though the implementation does not take into consideration security and anonymity concerns, it is a full implementation of the electoral system. The prototype itself was only written in a few weeks. It was a distributed system with a fantastic interface for internet voting, which was a terminal interface. I'm sure it would be very popular. But it was written just in a few weeks. So the system itself, the idea of voting is not very complex. It doesn't have inherent complexity, just the system itself. And I can say all of this because this was my master's thesis. And it wasn't hard. And you can read it online if you want to. And people have gotten paid to read my thesis, which I feel is a win. But I want to put an emphasis on this security and anonymity concerns, because this is the problem, and this is what makes elections so hard. So what are these? It's complicated. And let's start from the beginning. What are you actually protecting? The worst case scenario when it comes to a manipulated election is an accepted but manipulated election result. The idea here is that the population and the previous government will all accept a result that has been manipulated. We will believe it to be authentic, but it is not. Another very important term here is the election result. And we need to talk about what that means. An election result is the distribution of mandates. So, election doesn't have to be flawless in any way. You can have lots of errors in an election, as long as the election result is correct. So, if we go back to our election previously, this was a majority vote. We could have all sorts of flaws here. As long as the turtle wins, you can have a 13% error, and you will still have the same election result. And this is something that people find hard to understand sometimes when talking about elections. They say, yeah, but people make mistakes when counting. And we'll get back to that. People do make mistakes when counting. We all know that we've counted before. We have personal experience. But the likelihood of it affecting the election result is very small, and we'll talk about why later. Then we have to talk about what is the threat model for elections. What are we actually afraid of? What are we afraid that people will do? We are afraid they'll add ballots, take ballots away, change them, maybe just pretend the count was something else than it actually was. Maybe not count at all. But at its most extreme, we are trying to prevent a coup. And that is what will happen if you have an accepted but manipulated election result. You will have had a coup. There is no longer a democracy. The voice of the people was not heard. Someone else chose who would take power. But who are the threat actors? Who are the ones that might want to meddle in an election? The most likely threat actor, and this is surprising for many people, and extremely central to election security. The most likely threat actor, both historically and internationally, this is for looking back hundreds of years or just looking back the last 100 years. It is the sitting government. People keep on talking about a foreign government will meddle in our elections. But the most likely threat actor to meddle in an election, globally, today, last year, all over the world, is the sitting government. It's almost always the sitting government that manipulates an election. Of course, there are other ones. Foreign governments, private companies, terrorists, activists, lone wolves. A government that has been active in meddling in other countries' elections is the United States. Long history of meddling in the democratic process in other countries. Private companies also, in large parts of the third world, you've had private companies meddling in democratic process. But the most likely threat actor in an election is the sitting government. And that is important because this is the same government that's running the election. And this makes elections really hard. Because you can say, oh yeah, but I can protect the system, I can protect the system. Yeah, but you are the one that can't be trusted. The people who are writing to the logs, the people who are reading the logs, the people who are writing the systems, the people who are running the servers, the people who are deploying to these servers, they are the most likely threat actor. Another thing that is surprising about election security is that there are two acceptable outcomes. You can have a correct election, and great, and everyone is happy. But it's also an acceptable outcome if you prevented a rigged election. So actually discovering and preventing this coup from taking place is an acceptable outcome in election security. Unfortunately, this isn't always as easy. It comes with footnotes. Because the problem is, can you recover from that situation? As it stands today, most election experts in the United States think that the US election system cannot recover from a manipulation. In Norway, I don't think that is a problem. I think we have paper ballots. We can probably do a recount. Large parts of the US, they have no paper ballots. There is, and even doing a recount might not be feasible. So it is a problem, and something that election experts in the US are worried about. But another aspect, I talked about security and anonymity concerns. So let's talk about anonymity concerns. Because whenever I talk to anyone who likes computers about election systems, and they come like, yeah, but you can just do this. I love how we have a tendency to throw the word just out there. It's like, yeah, you just. The first thing they sacrifice in their theoretical model for solving elections is anonymity. That is always like the first, yeah, but you know, how So how does a secret ballot play into elections? Because it plays in on many levels. A true democracy requires the freedom of all of us to vote our conscience. And this might seem like a silly thing to say, like of course it's true, but it isn't. Most of us will keep certain things private, and some of us will have opinions that we don't want people, maybe at work or even in our families, to know that we have. So we've had breaches of all sorts of personal information that has come online. What if you were afraid that there would be just a breach somewhere, and suddenly your boss would know that you're voting for the Communist Party? Or something else. The problem is the moment people are afraid that other people might know what they voted, people start to do strategic choices. They will say, okay, I won't do this because I'm afraid somebody will find out, so I'll safe it a little bit. So people have to feel free to vote their conscience. But we also want to prevent coercion. And coercion is trying to make somebody else vote something they don't want to vote. Coercion is very common in workplaces. For example, your boss will tell you what to vote, but also in families, where one person in the family will dictate that everybody else has to vote a certain way. We also want to prevent vote selling. And both of these depend on one thing. If nobody knows what you voted, and you can't prove what you voted, then no one can check. If someone's trying to coerce you to vote against your conscience, then you can just walk out and say, yeah, I did what you said. There's no way for them to check. And so they can't beat you up or fire you because they can't check. Vote selling is the same thing. Why would I pay somebody to vote a certain way if I can't actually be sure that they voted the way I want? We also want to prevent persecution. We don't want people to be persecuted for the way they voted. And you think, yeah, but I'm not worried. Like, this government is never going to persecute me for the way I vote. Yeah, but what about if we suddenly have a fascist government in 10 years? They have the same data. Now they can put you on those lists. So persecution doesn't have to be now. It can be some other time. And it can even be that it was a breach, and this data was leaked online, and then suddenly now you're on somebody's list, a terrorist organization's list, for example. So we kind of have to go there. The answer is not the blockchain. I can't like skip over that in this talk, or else I will be stuck on Twitter forever. And so we'll go there just a little bit. To prevent persecution, we already talked about that. You don't want to connect a vote to a person. We don't want there to be a list on who voted what anywhere. There is no trusted third party here. To prevent coercion and vote selling, you don't want a person to be able to prove what they voted. If you can prove what you vote, then you can sell your vote. This is and we can make a system. Gosh, we can make computer systems for this. And actually, what is the thing that put that vote on the blockchain? And who's in charge of that? And what about chain of custody of those votes? And this is what you see in analysis of computerized voting again and again and again. It always breaks down somewhere around there. But let's talk about this man versus machine. Because I don't hate computers. I love computers. I've done nothing but for close to 20 years now. But manual elections have so many features that are really, really hard to beat. Currently, there is no known solution that is better and more transparent and more auditable than in a manual election. And we have to also realize that manual elections has spent hundreds and hundreds of years being perfected in the most crazy small ways. You can have, for example, you have the concept of a ballot box, which can contain lots of ballots. Now you think okay, yeah, but it's just a convenience because you have to put them in something and everything. It is a part of the anonymity chain. Because if you have to put your vote, your ballot, in a box full of other people's ballots, then it will be mixed together. Now it's your vote is 1 out of 1,000 before it even gets to anybody's hands. So it's already messed up, and you can see that process. It's visible to you when you put it in. All of these things are part of the auditability of a manual election, which has been designed to be that way. They're just that good. Okay, but isn't manual counting really slow? Surprisingly, no. And of course, when you think about it, it makes sense, right? It's massively distributed. If you have polling locations everywhere, and that is also a feature of manual elections, you can have polling places everywhere. Because you don't have to centralize it, because you don't have to buy the servers and everything. So suddenly you can have polling places in every church and every school. You can have them close to people. Suddenly now people can actually have access to vote because they can get to a polling location. It's not something they have to take a bus to that will take them hours out of their day just to go and vote. It's massively distributed because you do it locally at the polling place. Is manual counting error prone? Yes. Yes. I know. It's complicated. So let's look at that. So this is a risk model for Norwegian ballot counting. So we're going to see the risk model for ballot counting errors, man versus machine. So we need some things here to be able to measure the risk or to evaluate the risk, so we have to figure out what is going to measure our severity. In risk, traditional risk evaluations in security, you have severity on one axis and probability on another axis. So if something is really severe and really probable, you kind of have to do something about it. But very often those things are eliminated because people are not going to live in a world where there's a high probability of bad things happening. They will generally do things about those things. But how you evaluate severity is, first of all, can it affect the election result? If it can't, then it doesn't really matter. Can it go undetected? Because, okay, if it can affect the election result, will we notice? If we can't notice that it happened, then that is really bad, right? Can it discredit the election result? But now we're moving down. It's like, yeah, it can happen, but what do we do? It becomes more of a political problem, but it can become a huge problem. And this really depends. Like, revolutions have started based on an election result that people did not trust. If you have enough conflict already in society, and an election result is somehow discredited, even falsely, it can lead to physical violence, even to civil war. And then last is, like, can it create more work? And that means, do we have to, like, let's say that you have to do a manual recount of all of the votes or things like that. It will create more work, it will take more time. Yes, but it's not that bad. So how do we evaluate the likelihood? How normal is it? Like, how often does it happen? Do we have any data that we can measure? Like, how common is it? And is it a known threat? Because that will also change. Like, you might say that, okay, suddenly we're getting actual data coming in that there are people trying to do something. Now, suddenly, all of the probabilisticness will change, right? So then we can put it into, like, this risk diagram. And here are my evaluations for Norwegian elections. So likelihood. To have an innocent, so innocent in this case is just you didn't mean to, but you counted wrong. So manual counts are wrong, but nobody really meant to do anything bad. High likelihood. It's just because we all count wrong. Counting enough ballots, you're going to have an error rate. There has been measurements of this. In the US, you have really complicated ballots. They have, for Norwegians, this might be like really weird, but they have basically multiple choice ballots, and they can have like up to 80 contests on one singular ballot. It's really complicated. Oftentimes people actually miss elections because they thought it was instructions and things. It's like you have usability concerns with the ballots. US ballots are really, really hard to count because you actually have to go through and check what did people actually check off. Norwegian ballots are really easy because the ballot represents the party has the list on it. You can make alterations like manually, but almost nobody does. It's like 1% of the ballots. So 99 of them is basically counting paper. So it's really easy. So very informal examinations of numbers in Norway, around 0.02 to 0.1% error rate in counting-ish. But we need actual formal examinations of this. But yes, there will be errors, but there won't be much. Premeditated, no matter if it's manual or machine, I'm counting the likelihood in Norway to be low. That is basically something that NSM will have to evaluate whether that changes. But we don't have a lot of history for this here. But when it comes to machines, innocent counts, erroneous counts, I'm putting that at low to medium. And that's basically, those kinds of things would be bugs. And practically every single election we've used computers in Norway for the past 20 years or more, we have had bugs discovered on election day or after. Every single election. And practically all of them were discovered by accident. An example was, there was a candidate who got extra person votes, and he got a lot, like he got like 120, and people were like, who is this guy? And it turns out that he was getting these extra votes because people were writing his name, apparently, on ballots. But everybody was like, why haven't we ever heard of this guy if he's this popular, right? So they went back and they looked at the ballots, and actually he had gotten 0. So then they had to go and look at the software that was doing the character recognition. And what they found out was that it had a bug that when you wrote a name, if you had any kind of letter that went to the line below, like a G or a J or something, then it would think that something was written on that line. And since it wasn't able to figure out what it was, it would pick the first candidate alphabetically. And that's just one out of a lot of bugs. So then we go to severity. What is the severity? And the most surprising here is probably the low. Because I'm saying that an innocent manual erroneous count, the severity is low because this distributes proportionally. So let's say that you have 1,000 votes and you're going to make a mistake in counting 20. Then that will scale with the number of votes a party has. So a party that has lots of votes will have more errors, and a party that has few votes will have few errors. Chances are it will not affect the election result. Now there are exceptions to this, especially in close elections. And in Norway today, we don't really have good election regulations regarding close elections. Some states in the US, they do. So they will say that if the election is this and this close, we will do a manual recount. We don't have that in Norway, but that is a risk there in really close elections. When it comes to severity of premeditated, manual manipulations, it is at medium because, well, actually it could be low. Like, first of all, it's most likely going to be detected. The problem is it's really hard to go into a polling place. You have to physically be there. And also to be able to manipulate the election result, you have to be in many polling places. So now suddenly you have to have a conspiracy. You have to have lots of people involved. It's a very big chance it's going to leak somehow. And all of these people have to be physically present in the polling location, and they have to basically do the manipulation in front of other people. Very likely that they will be seen. And you see this a lot in manipulated elections in many countries that have tradition for manipulated elections. Everybody knows they are manipulated. It's not a secret. Everybody knows. You walk into a polling location and you see people replacing ballot boxes. It's like, and somebody will just take it home. It's not like it's a secret. So the problem there is nothing will change that. You are in a rigged system. There's nothing in the election process that will fix that. And nobody is respecting the election result. It is rigged. But in a true democracy, people will find out, and most likely find out, and you can actually invalidate the election result. The problem is people have touched the ballots. So in a manual election, and you find out this polling location, people have been trying to manipulate the election result. Can you trust the physical ballots anymore? Most likely no. So that makes it hard. Also because you can use this, right? You can say, okay, so fine, we're going to ignore all of the results from this polling location because we know people were trying to do something there. But now you can basically use this as a denial of service attack. Because you can go into, let's say, a predominantly liberal neighborhood, and you will do a very visible manipulation there, so all of their votes will be discounted. So yeah, it's an issue. When it comes to severity of machine erroneous counts, when it comes to a bug, the severity is medium to high. Medium because usually with bugs, they act weird, like they do weird things, and they have a tendency to be very consistent. And you saw an example of that in Norway, where the Labour Party didn't get any. We do weird things, but you can check off next to names. Don't worry about it. It's like weird Norwegian things that you can do. But basically, they thought it was weird that nobody got anything in the second column on the ballot. But that only, well, they didn't think it was weird. Nobody actually reacted. The results were finished and accepted when a guy who was in the second column on the ballot came and he said, okay, there's something weird here because you say I got none of the check marks, but I know I must have gotten at least one because I did it myself. And so then they go and they check the ballot, and it turns out that there had been a font change. So one of the columns had gone to bold, which had shifted it a little bit so that the checkboxes were no longer read by the character recognition software. And so all of the people in the second column, all of their check marks had disappeared. And so, of course, they had to go back, make changes, blah, 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 reread all the ballots. But the problem is that, so on the good side, bugs have a tendency to be like very visible because they have a tendency to do it for all of something. Unfortunately, they are generally only because nobody is actually, until now, nobody is actually auditing the election. It's only discovered by accident. So most bugs will probably never be discovered. When it comes to the severity of a premeditated, so now we're coming to somebody hacked the election type thing. The severity is very high because the chances are they are going for this to be covert, right? They might only alter like a few % of the votes. And because it's a single point of failure, you're just going for the computers, you don't even have to be physically present. You can sit at home in your country and do this. And you could in Norway, by the way, because 2 out of the 3 companies that were licensed to install ballot counting systems in Norway were not Norwegian companies. And at least one, but probably more than one, had remote access software to do support. So you could sit home, and do this, and then safely in a bunker in your own country. Okay, but using this, let's put them here, because this is where it gets weird. So the likelihood of innocent manual erroneous counts is high, but severity is low. And if you look at this, things suddenly realize that this is not as symmetric as we would think. Innocent machine counts is actually much more severe, although less likely. So, what can we do? Can we have manual elections? What security professionals in election security have come up with, and this is not new, is something called software independence. It was mentioned in a paper by Ron Rivest, who's the R in RSA, and John P. Wack. And software independence is quite simple. A voting system is software independent if an undetected change or error in its software cannot cause an undetectable change or error in an election outcome. This is not a technical definition, right? But it is fundamental in understanding what we need. And now the goal is, how do we achieve this? How do we achieve that it is not undetected? And it is from this paper called On the Notion of Software Independence in Voting Systems. So what we need is auditability. And we know this from software as well. We call it observability. It is the same idea. We need a way to see if it is right somehow. To verify the election results, not the voting system. This is from the same paper. So what we need to check is that the results are correct. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, like I said before, you don't know what software is running. I might write all of this software for all of this hand recognition software. And I can give it to you, I can open source it, you can review it, you can do all of those things. You can all say, oh yeah, it's very secure, it does all the things, it's like nothing. But when I'm actually standing here and showing you like the fancy graphics and the results, you don't know what's running. So what we need to figure out is a way to audit the results, not the system. But when we talk about manual elections, what does that really mean? The first part of a manual election will always mean paper ballots. You need something for people to count. And you need some kind of record of what people voted and a manual count. You can keep computers. I'm not saying, like, people come to me and they go like, Patricia, do you hate computers? It's like, can't we use computers for elections? Are you going back to the Stone Age? No, you can keep as many computers as you want. As long as I can be sure that the results are what people voted. And then you have, instead of manual elections, let's talk about auditable elections. We still need paper ballots, but we need a manual audit. We need a way to check it. And we need a way to check it that can be done by people, and by people who are not experts. We need a way for regular, normal people to be able to check that these results are correct. We need a way that we can train thousands of people to do this, because we need thousands of people to do this. So we need a way that I can teach somebody in 10 minutes what to do, and they can do it, and they can understand it. And they can walk away feeling confident that the things were correct. So if we add an audit, how does that affect this risk model? An audit will reveal both bugs and manipulations. And most of the time, it doesn't really matter which it is. Because suddenly, an innocent machine counting error will be discovered. And it is as likely as it was before, but now you can actually address it. It won't go hidden. And a premeditated attack will still be as likely as it was before. But now, again, we can discover it and address it. And the good thing about a machine count, which is manipulated, is that nobody has touched the ballots. You can just go count them. Just go count the ballots manually. It's really easy to recover. So how can we do an auditable election? So this year, we get a manual preliminary count. In Norway, we have two counts. I call one a preliminary count and one a final count. It has now, for the first time, the first count has to be manual. All over Norway, all of the ballots will be counted manually. So now you have one manual count, and then the second count, there is a high likelihood it will be counted by computers. You can ask me about how we got here. It's a long story. But one of the things that is important to realize here is that, okay, so now we have a manual count and we have a machine count. Okay, this is as far as we've gotten in Norway. It's taken me 2 years. So we still don't have a process for dealing with what happens if they're not the same, what matters if they differ greatly. And it was funny because when I was in the middle of this and they were pulling me on television for 2 years ago, a guy who until recently was the head of IT organization in Norway, he told me, okay, Patricia, you're going to go on TV. You're only going to be able to make 1 point, maybe 2. So you need to sit down and figure out what are the 2 things you want to say, because that is all you're ever going to be able to communicate on TV. So I basically talked to myself for like 3 hours, and then I called him up on the phone, and I said, okay, we need a way to know if there has been a manipulation. We need some way to discover it. And number 2, if we discover it, we need to do something about that. Currently, we're at number 1. There is no process in Norway for dealing with it if these two are in some way different. We don't even have a definition of what different means. What everyone is sure of is that they will differ, because a manual count will have manual errors, and there might be machine errors as well. So we know they will be different. But what is too different? We have nothing for that. But in the US, this gets more complicated. So the goal for many US researchers today is risk limiting audits. So step number one in that process, you have to have manual ballots. You have to have paper ballots that people can count manually, but they will most likely be counted by machines. So what you need is some kind of manual audit of the paper ballots, taking a percentage of them and checking them. And what they want to do is validate the results that the machines came up with. So basically saying, how likely is it that the count was correct? And the good thing about risk limiting audits, if we imagine again that we've voted here, and 90% of you, according to my machine, says that the turtle should be president. 10% of you says the hare. That's what my system says. Okay, a way that you can manually do a risk limiting audit of that is just take a random sampling of the audience. So just take like 10 people, put them in a line, and just ask each one. Now, if all 10 of those say hare, something's hinky. And you go like, okay, I could be like really, really unfortunate right now. So in a risk limiting audit, you'll just grab more people. And now you'll ask everybody again. And you will continue to grab more people as long as the results seem unlikely, until, worst case, this degenerates to a full manual recount. So this is a process where you can generally count very few votes and be pretty confident of the results. And that's all it is. It's a statistical model for manual ballot sampling. It isn't very complicated, and it can be done by people. And you don't have to train people for months or years. This is something that normal people can do. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be Vilde Amundsen's thesis advisor, where she looked at error detection mechanisms in Norwegian elections. And her thesis is available, and if this is something you want to study further, then please read it. But what was the fundamental problem that we had in Norway? We didn't have any audit. We had large parts of the ballots. Most likely for the election in 2017, the plan was most likely, because we don't have precise numbers and getting them is really hard, most likely about half of all ballots in Norway were going to be counted only by computers. Until I made a fuss. I made a large fuss. 10 days before the election, they issued an emergency regulation that said all ballots in Norway had to be counted manually at least once. So it didn't happen, but that was the plan. And that was the plan until the regulation this year as well. And there's a cheat in this, because the Norwegian government pays for these systems. All of the kommuner in Norway, so all of the municipalities in Norway, get this software for free. They never pay for it. But if they do a manual count or anything regarding the manual count, they have to pay for it over their own budgets. So for them, locally, it will seem cheaper to use computers for this. But nationally, I'm not sure that's true. We have a whole directorate that is dedicated to just making election systems in Norway. This directorate is under the government, the sitting government, reporting directly to the current sitting government. So paper ballots are not enough. They're a start, but it's not enough. You have to have an audit, and it has to be done by regular people. If you just have a plain normal, like manual counted election, then it has a built-in audit. It's people. People don't trust other people. It's like you put two people next to each other and they vote different parties and now they're going to count ballots. Like they're going to be checking each other. It's like, oh, is he doing anything hinky? People are naturally suspicious of other people. But people are not enough by far, and that includes us, and suspicious enough of computers. It's like, oh no, it was a computer, it must be fine. Computers are objective, right? It's like, there can't be any kind of bias built into computers, can it? It's not like we can actually, like write things and make computers do other things, is it? So manual counted elections can also be rigged. Yes, they can. But when they are, everybody knows they are. So the question is, if an election is rigged and nobody knows, do you have a democracy? Of course not. You've had a coup. You just don't know. But let's take a step back and look a little bit at this at a broader perspective, outside of elections. What could an attack on another type of critical infrastructure look like? And we saw an example. Stuxnet. There are many interesting facts about Stuxnet, but the most interesting fact, I think, in 2019 is that it came out in 2010. That's 9 years ago. They think the development of Stuxnet started in 2005. That's 14 years ago. Stuxnet was an attack on Siemens PLCs and centrifuges in an Iranian uranium enrichment plant. Okay. It was an attack on an embedded device. It was an attack to cause physical damage. They recorded data, the malware recorded data for a long time, diagnostic data, good data, for weeks. And when the attack was performed, they replayed the good data. So everything looked fine. We think probably hundreds of centrifuges were destroyed. Some people think it delayed Iranian uranium enrichment for at least 2 years. It cost tremendous amount of money, and it took a very long time to realize what was going on. Now, we can feel however we feel about like Iran having nuclear anything. But what we saw here is an attack that we had never seen before. And it came out in 2010. And one of the things that I want you to notice, and if you want to read about it, you can read this book by Kim Setter. It's awesome. But one thing I want to point out is this part. The diagnostic data was manipulated. So the people who were watching these machines didn't understand what was going on because everything looked fine. And what is really modern life today, if not completely ruled by critical infrastructure? And what is critical infrastructure anyway? But we have power, we have internet, we have water, we have waste disposal, we have all sorts of things that if it breaks down, modern society will break down really rapidly. And what we've seen now in this current cyber war that is going on, for example, in the Ukraine, is that this is exactly what they're going for. They're going for shutting down power, shutting down internet. Because modern society is a legacy system. It wasn't really designed. It kind of just got that way. We had water treatment plants, then we put them on the internet. We had power grids, and then we put them on the internet. It's based on layers of data technology, and of course it would be, because it's too expensive to be able to change it out all the time. So you have to. This isn't a flaw. This is how it's always going to be. Whatever is modern is going to be legacy. And it contains massive technical debt. Because unless you get the priority, you can't do the investments you want to do. It lacks holistic security analysis. What happens if power goes out? What happens if power goes out in my building in the middle of the winter? I lose heat. Now you think, oh yeah, because she has electrical heating, but I don't have electrical heating. I have water radiators with the water, actually the hot water coming centrally. The problem is I have an electrical pump in my basement. So did something happen to make us less secure today in modern society? Or did it just suddenly feel more likely? And what lessons can we learn from the mistrust that is embedded in election security? Make diagnostics not depend on computers. Have some way for people to observe directly what is going on in your physical system. Be wary of single points of failure. Segment your infrastructure. If something breaks down, make sure it doesn't spread. And test. Manual operations require physical presence. And that is a feature because it's much more risky for people to be there in person. And figure out who are your most likely threat actors. And don't care about what's on TV, study history. On the other hand, of course, on July 10th, 2019, the Ukrainian Secret Service raided the South Ukraine nuclear power plant. So you would think, oh yeah, they had a cyber attack, Nah. Employees at a Iranian nuclear power plant connect the plant's network to the internet so they can mine cryptocurrency. I mean, yeah. So, to finish off the talk, I guess we should talk about what is the best way to manipulate an election, just to get it off our chests. So, if you want to rig your election, if you're a sitting government and you want to make sure you get re-elected, what is the absolute best way to go about that? Internet voting. Thank you so much.